Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what's up? This is episode 3 of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Matt McPeak. I'm joined here by Adam Natras. Adam, what's up, man?
Just happy to be here. Cranking away, huh? 3 weeks in.
Yeah, dude. So today we're going to be going through some free agents and players that were traded over the offseason. We're going to look at their new situations on their new teams, see if maybe it's looking up for them, looking down for them, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle. When we're done with that, we're going to run through some of the worst defenses last year, some of the worst DSTs, and see if any of them look to be making any improvements in 2019, or if it looks like they're going to kind of just stay where they're at. Obviously, we love targeting those awesome matchups throughout the week, make those middle-tier value guys even more valuable. And then when we're done with that, Adam's going to run through some of his DFS strategy. He's a big DFS player. Adam, how many daily lineups do you think you're going to have for week 1?
Currently standing today, as of right now, I think I have about 15.
Okay.
That number will drastically grow. I just kind of did it early to play around, but into the next week, I'll end up with about 40.
Okay, cool.
You got to play the odds.
It's like when people ask me why I'm in 8 leagues this year. It's like when you go fishing, right? Why throw out just one line when you can throw out 8 lines?
I think the real answer to that question is, my answer always is, well, let's see, my athletic ability topped out in about the 10th grade. I'm 30, so my interests really don't vary. I've got nothing better to do than go to work. So, yeah, bring on the 12 leagues.
Yeah.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
It's football season, man.
Right. We're back.
When we're done going through the DFS stuff, we'll try and look at a few players that are coming off of injury from last season that are already dealing with new injuries this season, i.e. Cam Newton. So let's jump right into it here. And the first free agent that I want to talk about is Mark Ingram, who goes from the Saints to the Ravens. He leaves a split backfield to join the Ravens, where he'll be the surefire number 1 runner. The Ravens absolutely love to run the ball. They probably won't be running the ball as much as they did last year. I think they're going to try and get a little more out of Lamar Jackson's arm, but still they're going to run the ball. They're going to rely on that awesome defense of theirs. We've seen running backs benefit from quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson in the past, who probably have a little higher value in standard leagues than in PPR leagues, because he probably won't be catching as many passes as he was catching with the Saints, but I think as far as overall touches go, he's still going to see those carries.
You know what's funny about Mark Ingram to me, if you think about it, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but I've always thought of Mark Ingram as a Ravens running back. I mean, you saw him on the Saints, but you're like, no.
That's true.
This guy's a Ravens running back. What's he doing here? It fits. It's like the same running back they've had. Remember Jamal Anderson?
Right.
I'm not going to pretend
he totally fits with the Ravens for sure.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend Mark Ingram's going to go out and get 2,000 yards, but he does look like he belongs.
And I mean, last year he was drafted in probably the 5th, 6th round in a lot of drafts, even though he was suspended for the first 4 games.
You know what? And if you took him there, you got to win. He did pretty good when he was there.
Yeah, I was all about getting him in the middle of the draft last year.
He was a great RB2 that people had.
The next guy I want to talk about is the man replacing Mark Ingram in New Orleans, and that is Latavius Murray. Considering how much time his teammate in Minnesota missed, Dalvin Cook, in the past 2 seasons, Murray may see a little less touches than he saw there in Minnesota that he'll see here with the Saints, solely because Alvin Kamara is just absolutely amazing at everything that they use him for. He's incredible.
But you also know that they're not trying to overload him, so he might have more regular touches.
I think I don't know if he's going to have any more. I don't know if Kamara's going to see an increase in touches just because Ingram's not there, I fully expect all those touches that were going to Ingram to now go to Latavius Murray.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think Latavius Murray on a game-to-game basis will have a more regular touch count. He's not going to get as much because of those influx games from Dalvin Cook playing all of 3 weeks of football, but he might be a more regular part of the Saints' game plan as they try to preserve Kamara.
Yeah, he might have more consistent touches.
That's the way I say it.
But I mean, he's on a team with a much better offensive line, a Hall of Fame quarterback. So yeah, he's definitely going to get the consistent work there as the number 2, and he probably won't get the goal line work that we saw him get in Minnesota solely because A, the Saints love throwing the ball to Michael Thomas on the goal line. B, they just brought in Jared Cook, who I think is going to get plenty of red zone targets. And C, the way that they use their backup quarterback, Taysom Hill, in any play, I feel like sometimes they just flip through the playbook and randomly they go, all right, we're going to have Taysom do this. It's just crazy how much they use him.
And they think it's going to throw anybody off from what this kid's going to go out there and do. I don't get that. Like, if I see him on the field, I'm arguably stacking the box half the time. I'll make him beat me with his arm.
But, I mean, they had plenty of plays last year where he threw the ball deep, and now that Ted Ginn is, hopefully healthy going into the beginning of the season, having that reliable speed number 2 receiver on the outside that they kind of didn't have last year. This offense, I think, is going to do special things, man.
Before we move on real quick, I'll tell you one thing about Alvin Kamara I saw. So, in games without Mark Ingram, he averaged an absurd 30 to 36. It's in that range, fantasy points per game. If you look at his statistics, when Mark Ingram's not there, he's hands down the best running back in the league.
Well, it was just
per touch basis.
It was just those 4 games last year that Ingram was suspended for, right?
So I don't know if Mark maybe had missed any more games or if they're dialing it back to the year before as well from that statistic.
Okay.
It was just overall when Mark Ingram wasn't there. So
okay.
I think that just might be since, for 2 years, you could say, however long they've been there, he's averaging, when he's the main back, he crushes it.
Yeah. And like you said, I don't think the Saints really want to give him that many carries or that many touches. I think they don't want to overload this kid. He isn't the biggest framed running back out there,
not.
But he is definitely one of the most talented. So the next guy that I want to talk about is obviously one of the biggest names in the offseason, Antonio Brown. He joins the Raiders after a trade with Pittsburgh. He likely won't see the volume that he saw in Pittsburgh, but he is the shiny new toy in Oakland, and I expect to see Gruden, at least in the beginning of the season, kind of funnel him the ball and say, this is why we got the guy. Hopefully his feet aren't still frostbitten, and hopefully he's got the right helmet. I think it's all just BS. I think AB just doesn't want to go to practice. He doesn't want to go to training camp. He doesn't want to do all the preseason crap. I think when it comes time for the first day of the game, I think, that Sunday the 8th, I think we're going to see the same old Antonio Brown that we've seen on the field. The fact that you can get him in the third round in some situations, unless
kind of crazy to be honest with you.
Barring that his feet are still messed up, which I feel like it's far enough out, and the training staffs with the NFLs nowadays, it's ridiculous. I have all the confidence in the world that he's going to come back and be a legit number 1. I don't think he's going to see 130 targets or whatever he saw last year, but he's still going to be used, and I think he's still going to produce for sure. And
he's probably not going to have that big of a drop-off, just considering the fact that last year, they had Juju on the other side, and Juju's a heck of a ball player. I know that Terrell Williams is a great ad for the Raiders. I really think that kid found a good home, but he's no Juju. So, and also, as we all know, Antonio has really set the tone as being part of the Kardashian family with his just divaness. So if you're the Raiders organization, you know full well if you're not throwing that guy the ball at least 15 times a game, he's going to make a scene. He's going to make a scene.
Yeah,
that's what you get, but you know that his talent's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring up Tyrell Williams because he's actually next on my list. And, I think he's going to be just as good as he was there. I have him here as a 50-50. I don't really know if his situation is any better or any worse than it is or than it was. He's gotten pretty used to playing on the other side of a top 10 receiver, playing with Keenan Allen for this long. And I think if anything you can look at is the talent of the quarterback that he's playing with is probably a little lesser. So if anything, maybe Tyrell Williams, maybe his outlook is a little down compared to what it would have been if he stayed with the Chargers. But, I mean, I still think he's going to see plenty of targets, and playing on the other side of a top 10 wide receiver is always a good thing.
And I really think that right there is going to be the biggest difference, is that the Chargers, they were determined to get the ball to Mike Williams. And why wouldn't they be? He was their first-round pick a few years ago, 7th overall or whatever it was.
Right.
So, Terrell really had like an every other game situation going on. Like, there were games he didn't get targeted at all. I think he has a chance in Oakland. A chance. I'm going with you on that 50-50 chance to actually separate himself and become the legitimate number 2. Mm-hmm. And when Keenan Allen was out, he was a heck of a player, which happened frequently. So, but it's not Phillip Rivers.
Right. The next one is a guy that I'm sure you hold near and dear to your heart, is Mr. Deshaun Jackson, who goes back to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Thank God.
When Philly won the Super Bowl that year, I feel like their offense was aggressive downfield. Every time that you saw Wentz, bootleg, or every time you saw him escape from the pocket, he was always looking down the field to throw the ball, and there was a bunch of dudes that year that made ridiculous catches. Alshon Jeffrey made a bunch of them. And I think that is going to be something that we didn't see last year, that Deshaun immediately brings, is that deep threat. And, it doesn't have to be on plays, on breakdown plays where Wentz is escaping the pocket. They are now going to be installed deep throw plays because this dude can still run.
Right. The addition of Deshaun first off, you could quite literally draw a circle or a line back to Chip Kelly, right? And when he got rid of him, and they have been trying.
And who was it? It was him, and it was Macklin, and
we don't want to talk about the great
Shady
purge,
McCoy.
But maybe that's what got us to where we are. But regardless,
it was a purge, dude.
That was
nothing. Crazy.
You've never seen a team get less for bigger stars within the team's confines than when that happened. When Kiko Alonso is the biggest name you're getting back for your studs, and they're in their prime.
And Kiko was then traded the year later, right?
Yep. And the worst part is, other than Macklin because of his injury, I mean, Deshaun is obviously, here he's back. Shady has done it one more year every single time. I thought Shady was going to be done 3 years ago.
Right.
And so, yeah, but, past that point, they've been trying to replace Deshaun since they got rid of Deshaun, and have only successfully replaced Deshaun by going back and getting Deshaun. I mean, they went with Mike Williams. He got hurt. He just did not work out. They wanted a guy that could take the top off. When they won the Super Bowl, they had Torrey Smith, but he was an elder statesman at that point. But even then, his speed still helped open up the field for guys like Zach Ertz to have big games. And now you can pretty much look at that on stage. I mean, no one takes the top off the field. No one is a better deep threat receiver than Deshaun Jackson.
Right.
He just knows what he's doing. So like you said, it doesn't even have to be on those breakdown plays. They're going to send him deep, so you have to send a safety with him, right? Can't let him just burn you. And
then Ertz is going to be like, hey, I'm open.
The funny and they're loaded, and that's the kicker. Like, from a fantasy perspective, I think Deshaun is going to be a better daily fantasy play almost than maybe a year-long league. But he's going to be a guy that comes out. He might have 3 targets a game, but one of those targets is a 65-yard bomb. It's just going to be on if he catches it or not.
Right. That's kind of his MO, and that's kind of one thing that's hurt his value is he's not a consistent target guy.
He's not a volume guy.
Yeah, and he's not a big catch guy. He's as far as numbers go, but yeah, he is going to catch bombs. That's what he does. But if you line up Deshaun out wide and then you put Ertz and Goddard,
you're forgetting JJ, the rookie.
But even just that set, right? And
how do you defend it?
And you put Goddard, even if you put him in line, right? Those two dudes running on the inside, knowing that the safety is not going to be coming down on them.
You got no one that's
lethal,
stopping
dude.
Those two. And then you have Alshon and, again, the kid JJ Artia, or Artiega Whiteside, however you say it. He's been excellent.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting offense.
Good hands.
The next guy that I want to talk about is Devin Funchess. I was a hell of a lot more excited to talk about him before we found out Andrew Luck decided to retire, but I had him down as his situation being good, but now it's not looking all that great.
I'd shy away. I mean, Jacoby Brissett, you have no idea.
The combination of having the new quarterback and the fact that both of these tight ends look healthy, And then, they just drafted a kid, Paris Campbell. They're going to try and work him in. So I think Devin Funchess is really only going to find himself on the field when they're in like 4 receiver sets or when they're 3rd and 12, 3rd and 13 type of situations. I don't know if he's going to have a regular role on this offense. I think they're going to be so much more predicated on playing defense and running the ball that the volume that he gets is not going to be enough. I would just completely avoid him, to be completely honest.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the only chance that he has is because he's a big guy, right? And this is really theoretical. Because Jacoby Brissett is Jacoby Brissett, maybe he develops chemistry because he's an easy target. But you've got 2 tight ends there. Like, they finally have an offensive line. If you're Andrew Luck, you got to be like, I cannot believe we finally got an offensive line 10 years later.
That's the biggest thing to me that is such a as far as like questioning why he retired. I get it, he's in pain and all that, but like, you finally have one of the best offensive lines in football, and you have a good defense too. The Colts defense was in like the top 10 last year. Yeah. They were great. The rookie middle linebacker playing that zone coverage, It was great. And now he finally has a good defense and a good offensive line with his talent, and having T.Y. with a pair of really good tight ends. Whatever the wide receiver 2 situation ends up being, and a set of running backs that
they were set to go.
They were set, dude.
But that's why you really got to dial it back when you think about it. Like, this guy who's been a competitor for 29 years of his whole life, right? Playing high-end football, quarterback, the whole 9. He must really have some serious issues now, because he did it. He's just not the type of guy. Like, he's never been a diva. He's definitely not the type to sit there and do this 2 week. So the way I think of it, he's probably what I refer to as the Chris Pronger. It probably terrifies him when he wakes up in the morning and can't remember his own name.
Chris Pronger, who's that?
Chris Pronger, Philadelphia Flyer, defenseman. We got him. It's hockey, I know, but we got him. He used to be a stud. A couple concussions.
I guess what you're telling me is that I need to download the Nobody Cares About Hockey drop.
Oh, yeah.
For the podcast, just in case.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't care about hockey. It's just the most relatable subject.
Okay.
Or the Eric Lindros, right? Where it's just like, after enough injuries. I mean, the guy was peeing blood last year.
Really?
Yeah, when he had his lacerated kidney, that's what was happening. So at that point, I get it.
Oh, you're talking about when Luck lacerated his kidney, yeah.
Yeah, like, the dude's been
if you look back at his surgeries, it's not like, right now it's like an ankle injury that turned into it was like a foot injury that turned into a high ankle sprain or something. And, maybe some people are looking at that and going like, oh, he's retiring with an ankle sprain, but he's had like back issues, shoulder, elbow.
The dude wants to make sure he can still
lacerated
walk.
Kidney. That's serious stuff, man. So I get it. He's not in the mindset to play anymore. I feel like if you're going to be a quarterback and you're going to drop back with the possibility of having an NFL defensive end come free off the other side and hit you, like, you have to be in the mindset to compete. And if he can't do it, then he can't do it.
And you know what's crazy about this whole thing? And then we'll move on, because we're we're talking about the non-important anymore.
Right.
Gronk is the same age, doing the same thing. So the only difference is Gronk was a Patriot and won a couple Super Bowls, but it's the same thing. Gronk is at the top of his game. He's just been beaten up too many times. Like, Gronk is more Gronk's fault because he's a human bowling ball, but
and he's kind of more set up to be making money. I don't want to say more set up, but whatever
Gronk is a sideshow that people pay to see. So
that situation is what it is. But I mean, when it comes to the Colts and when it comes to fantasy football, I mean, I hear you saying like, with Jacoby Brissett, like, when we were just talking off air for a minute about DFS and kind of targeting, playing DSTs against the Colts, and you'll get into it. Honestly, I don't know if this offense is going to be as horrible as some people are thinking it's going to be. Obviously, it's not going to be as good as it was with Andrew Luck, but are they still going to be a mid-level team that can run the ball and that has a wide receiver like they have weapons? That's what I'm saying. I think they're going to be decent. So I don't know if
I'll talk to my theory on that when we get there.
Yeah. When we get to that, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. But the next player I want to talk about, free agency move, is Jared Cook. I kind of talked to him about him a little bit last night when I went through the tight ends, and obviously he's going to a team with the Saints that had Jimmy Graham for a few years, and that kind of I don't want to say revolutionized because that happened a long time ago, but they showed themselves to have a tight end that was up in the level of Gronk for a couple years. I think Jared Cook can run those same routes. I mean, when Graham came in, he was so unpolished. He was just a big dude that knew how to use his body. And I think Jared Cook, being in the league for whatever it's been now, maybe 8 years, I mean, he knows how to run routes, and he's got the same body type as Graham. So I think, can Jared Cook become a top 3 tight end like Jimmy Graham was? I don't know.
No, not at this point.
No, but can he be in the top 5 or top 6?
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Have we talked about Jared Cook having a breakout year 7 or 8 times since he started? Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, he was in a great situation a couple years ago with Aaron Rodgers, and he just had an okay season. But
Richard Rodgers got the well, I mean, I think that really is the thing that when you consider the fact that with Jared Cook, he really hasn't, and this could be a blasphemous sentence, had a tight end friendly quarterback necessarily. Aaron Rodgers is not what you would call a tight end friendly. He's a boss. He does not need the tight end safety valve.
Right.
And so neither does Drew Brees, but Drew Brees uses the tight end much more than Rodgers does.
But then again, he's had Jimmy Graham to use, and Aaron Rodgers has had
Jared Cook.
Jared Cook one season, yeah.
Richard Rodgers was the man when he was there.
He's all right.
Penn State local, Philadelphia Eagle.
Being a homer over there on the other side of the
I had a good buddy that took a class with him, said he was a nice guy.
I bet he was. The next guy I want to talk about is Cordero Patterson. Had a very interesting year last year. Was used on as a running back in certain situations with the Patriots. He's been in the league for a couple years now. He was a top 10 pick, I think it was a couple years ago, right? When he was with the Minnesota Vikings, people were thinking he was the next Randy Moss. Do I think he's going to be a top echelon wide receiver? No, but I think in this system with Matt Nagy, now that he's on the Bears, a combination of that and the versatility that he's shown, I think you could see Matt Nagy scheming up some stuff for Cordero Patterson. So maybe he's a guy you kind of look at on the DFS side that if after a week or two, if we see him more involved than we thought we would, maybe he can be a cheap play for you. But he's someone that is definitely in a good situation considering his versatility and the offense that he's going to be playing in. Another guy is Randall Cobb, who leaves Aaron Rodgers. He's never... Leaving Aaron Rodgers is obviously never a good thing, but you look at James Jones and Jordy Nelson, what they did with the Raiders, actually.
Yeah, James Jones on the Raiders for that one season I had him.
Yeah, he was pretty good.
He was the greatest flex. He had 10 points a game. You weren't sure how he got it, but he got it every game.
And then that was it, right?
Right. You were never sure though how he got it.
Yeah, but Randall Cobb will be finding the role left behind by Cole Beasley. So if you look at Beasley's targets and catches, that 65 catches on 86 targets for 672 yards, 3 touchdowns. I think Cobb can easily replace that. I think he can improve on that for sure. I think we would see his targets up closer to 100 than 86. I think he can catch 70 to 72 of them, and I think he can be way closer to the 800 mark, probably 4 or 5 touchdowns. Especially with they have so many contract issues going on in Dallas.
It makes me
Who the
happy.
hell knows what's going to happen?
Right.
Michael Gallup is looking like the guy that if Amari Cooper is, whatever is going on with him, and plus he's got a foot injury going on as well. So who knows what's going to be going on in Dallas come week 1? And if Randall Cobb is healthy, he's been a consistent wide receiver in this league, and I think he could be another, flyer play there and maybe just DFS, but someone that you want to keep your eye on in the beginning of the season. He could be one of those guys that emerges as in a full point PPR, a guy that catches 6-7 passes for 70 yards or whatever a game.
And it's not like Dak has a whole lot of options, so.
I mean, they got Jason Witten back, and he's going to help him out on third down.
Right.
But as far as getting like consistent targets,
yeah. It's Amari Cooper if he plays. I'm sure he will. But those are wide receiver 1 targets, right? Those aren't necessarily like your Cole Beasley targets, your safety net. Let me ask you this question before we move on. Because it's arguably, you're filling those missed targets from Cole Beasley to Randall. Randall Cobb's been hurt a few times, right? Like I don't know if he's had any knee injuries.
I don't
because the reason I asked, Cole Beasley excelled at separation from the defense based on his route running.
Right.
Not the fat, but precision routes. I think Randall Cobb's probably faster. Does he run as clean of a route? And if he doesn't, does that, that changes things, right? Like,
I mean, they're both slot receivers, and they're both
it's what slot receivers do. So
they're both going to be running those like option routes and those type of inside routes. But I think Cole Beasley and Randall Cobb have very different body types. Like Cole Beasley is just this little dude that's just scrambling around, you know what I mean? Whereas Randall Cobb, I think, is actually
he's a football player.
He's gonna run some routes and he's gonna take hits, and he's not just gonna be running the sideline. That maybe I'm not giving Cole Beasley enough love. He never did anything wrong to me. I don't want to talk too much trash on him, but I don't know. I would, if I had to build a NFL team, and
Randall Cobb over Cole Beasley every time. I'm with you. I was just wondering and asking does it change how they go about it?
I don't know. It's going to be an interesting situation.
I hope they're I hope they're a disaster,
especially with Witten there. That those underneath routes that maybe Cole Beasley was being targeted on would have been for Jason Witten if he was still there. So, yeah, who knows? It's another one of the question marks, which is why Week 1 of the NFL is so awesome, because it's literally a playoff game because you have no idea what's going to happen.
Can I just say that Jason Witten was hands down one of the worst broadcasters ever to listen. I'm half convinced that the broadcast network paid the Cowboys
to take him back.
Yeah, to get him out of the booth. He was that bad.
That's funny. The last guy I want to talk about that has changed teams is Dante Moncrief. He's obviously going to be competing with Juju and the rookie James Washington for touches, but with so much attention going to Juju now without Antonio Brown there, I think Moncrief could have a decent year. I mean, we've seen Ben Roethlisberger throw how many pass attempts over these past few years. I don't know if they want to give as much work to this group of running backs that they generally used to give to Le'Veon. I think we're going to see Big Ben throwing the ball around just as much as he has been in the past. So Dante Moncrief could end up being maybe one of not the worst, wide receiver 3.
They got 110 targets to disperse from Antonio, right? So if he even
100 something, right. It might even be. I think it might be more than that.
If he got half, that's a good wide receiver 3, right?
Yeah.
50 catches, and that's not bad for your bench.
So that's Dante Moncrief. That is the end of the list of free agents to change teams here. We're going to jump in now to some of the defenses last year that were kind of targets for us as far as matchups go. If you remember last year, teams like the Bengals and the Chiefs were looking at the Falcons a lot. I remember the Buccaneers. A lot of these teams were, teams that if you're trying to play a mid-level, picking up somebody off the waiver wire, and you find out, hey, we got a running back that's playing the Bengals this week, that automatically gives them a little more value. So I wanted to look at some of these teams and see if we expect them to look the same coming into this year, or if they've made any major improvements. I mean, a lot of times with defense, I feel like if there's a key injury, for example, with the Falcons, Deion Jones gets hurt, and it just completely changes the way that they play defense. So, if teams don't have the depth there at certain positions, how do they respond? And I think last year we saw a couple teams that got really bitten by the injury bug, and they just weren't able to respond. They didn't have the depth. So the Bengals last year, they drafted a dude named Jesse Bates in the second round, Jesse Bates the third. And he ended up playing safety for him. He played pretty well, actually. The Bengals now have a pretty good pair of safeties between him and Sean Williams. Bates last year had 3 interceptions. He defended 7 passes, and he had over 110 total combined tackles. So the dude, he came in, he played right away. They re-signed Darqueze Dennard, and they re-signed Tony McRae. So they got their secondary is coming back. They're all coming back healthy. So we'll see how that secondary looks. They shouldn't be too bad. They shouldn't be as bad as they were last year. They bring back, re-signed Preston Brown, who apparently is trying to lose some weight. He's one of the bigger linebackers, and obviously the linebacker position has been going through somewhat of a transformation over these past few years, trying to get these linebackers that are fast, that can cover sideline to sideline, that maybe aren't as much of run stuffers as they are as tight end matchup guys and guys that can pick up running backs coming out of the backfield. So they also signed Emmanuel Turner to play on the defensive line, but the key guys here are Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlop, who are both getting a little older now, Carl Lawson, Sean Williams, and William Jackson III, a cornerback that they're really hoping to take the next step this year. If they can all stay healthy, they should be able to improve on what was the worst defense in total points last year.
They were awful. I was just looking at their stats again. Gave up like the most yards.
They were bad,
but randomly, and I love seeing rankings where they get the benefit of the doubt because of this. Randomly, they got 5 turnovers for touchdowns. They scored 5 touchdowns. So only Chicago scored more. Like, that's a fluke.
Right.
But they're getting loved because of that in some areas.
Yeah, they must have had a bunch of random plays happen there. So I think they could be better. I'm not saying go out and draft the Bengals DST or anything, but are they going to be a team that we can target as far as matchups? That's a team that I'm going to have to wait and see. It's not one of the teams where I'm going to look back, and this is one of the tough things with matchups is in week 1, the only thing you really have to go off of is how the team did as far as fantasy points allowed to those positions last year. And, obviously the situation right now is completely different than it was throughout the season last year, whether it's injuries, guys that that they're brought on throughout the year that, maybe don't play as big of a role in the beginning of the season that end up having a big role at the end of the season. So, trying to target matchups in the first few weeks of the season is pretty tough. But looking at what the Bengals have done in the offseason and the guys that they're getting back healthy, guys that missed time last year, they should be a little bit better than they were last year at least. I'm saying they're probably not an easy matchup to pick on. The Chiefs this offseason made a completely. They just took their defense and pretty much threw it out and replaced the entire thing.
Well, they played last year basically without a defense.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make that much of a difference when you start with that.
Last year, Eric Berry missed how much time as their leader and probably someone that they were really counting on to hold that defense together. He ended up playing 1 game or 2 games at the end of the season. Yeah, I think he played a little in the playoff game, but really wasn't able to put in any serious snaps. He ended up getting cut. Justin Houston gets cut, defensive end for them for years. They trade away Dee Ford after franchise tagging him. They let Alan Bailey leave in free agency, so that's 3 defensive ends and a safety that they lose, plus Derek Johnson retires. So there's 5 guys that were major contributor, or they're supposed to be major contributors at least last year for them, and they're all gone. And so how do they replace all this talent? So they traded for linebacker Darren Lee. They bring in defensive end Frank Clark from Seattle through a trade. I think it was actually on draft day or the day before or something. They signed Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger.
I love him.
Yeah.
I love him.
He's going to be fun to watch in a Chiefs uniform.
Oh, yeah.
And then they bring on Alex Okafor and Emmanuel Ogbah to play defensive end for them. They bring on cornerback Brashad Breeland. They sign a safety by the name of Juwan Thornhill, who's projected to be their starting safety to play alongside of Tyrann Mathieu. And they bring on a cornerback that, for the Jets for the past few years, Maurice Claiborne, who, he wasn't the player that people were expecting him to be when he was drafted by Dallas, but he's been a playable guy.
Right.
He's going to play probably third corner for him, maybe, if he can get in on the nickel, but he's going to contribute for him. So they also went out and hired Steve Spagnuolo to coach their defense. He brings with him this 4-3 scheme. So this defense is going to look completely different.
Well, what you saw and really what happened is that clearly, Andy Reid said, I need to build a defense. I need to do it my way because this isn't working, and it wasn't. So if you notice that team that you read, one thing you can never say about Andy is that he couldn't do he knew defense. I mean, he evaluated defense. The Eagles always had a great defense.
But it was because of the coordinator that
the
had,
coordinator,
right?
Jim Johnson. But then he switched it to it switched over time without question. But they still always drafted. The depth that they had was outrageous. I mean, they were getting all pro cornerbacks in the fourth. Bobby Taylor. So Andy learned something from Jim. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you're seeing now, where he's like, he's got the clout where he can say, I got to redo this and send D Ford packing. And, Tyrann Mathieu reminds you of, dare I say, legendary Brian Dawkins.
Okay.
No, he doesn't. No one's going to be that. But
in the
vein of that defense, Andy looks to be building something very similar to his early 2000s defense.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't really have to do much on offense. They went out and they drafted another speedster to play on the other side of Tyreek Hill. And their offense was amazing last year as it is. So I think they really focused on the defense and said, if we want to win a game in the AFC Championship in overtime, we can't have our defense just let the Patriots just march down the field.
Right. Or all
first
season.
down after first down after first down. It was ridiculous.
I mean, they got the grace of God that Patrick Mahomes had the season he did.
Right.
And I don't see that being repeated like we talked about last week. That's tough. That would be very tough to repeat.
Yep.
So your defense has to step up.
So another bad defense from last year. I remember they were always in like the top 2 or 3 as far as receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs. They're a team that in my PPR league, I was really targeting pass-catching running backs against them, and this is the Atlanta Falcons. They were completely victimized by running backs last year. They allowed the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks as well, and the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So they were bad, man. And it was obvious this offseason that the Falcons wanted to focus on rebuilding the offensive line first. For whatever reason, in free agency, they did nothing as far as defense goes. They went out and they added 2 guards, James Carpenter and Jamon Brown, and then they signed 2 blocking tight ends in Logan Paulson and Luke Stocker. So after a year that they had an absolutely abysmal defensive showing, mostly because of Deion Jones missing the majority of the season, if not all of it. I mean, for a team that has a head coach that was a defensive coordinator and, that's his MO, Dan Quinn, for whatever reason, in free agency, they didn't add anybody. And, it was obvious that in the draft is where they were going to try and pick some guys up. So they then cut Robert Alford, and they lost Brian Poole to free agency. So there's another 2 cornerbacks on their defense. So their defense got even worse, theoretically, right? So they ended up going out in the 4th round of the draft. They got a cornerback from Ohio State named Kendall Sheffield. And then later in the draft, in the 5th round, they went and got another corner, Jordan Miller. He's like 6'1". He's one of these huge corners that Dan Quinn used to get all the time when he was in Seattle. You look at Richard Sherman and Brandon Browner, right? They had those 2 huge corners. So, yeah, will these guys come out and be Richard Sherman and Brandon Browner? Probably not, but maybe. We'll see what happens.
In fairness to that statement, we didn't think Richard Sherman was going to come out and be Richard Sherman.
Exactly. So maybe he knows what he's doing as far as corners go, but, I mean, it's just weird to see them.
He's very clearly going with this, Matt Ryan's getting up there in age. Let's just go for the shootout. Let's give him the weapons. The defense will take too long.
And I think they're really just relying on Deion Jones coming back and being healthy.
An absolute beast.
And, I mean, they have 2 really good defensive ends there as it is, Tack McKinley and Adrian Claiborne. I think they also went out and got Bennett too, didn't they? Didn't they sign Martavis Bennett? Jesus, the guy that was on the Eagles.
I honestly can tell you I don't remember where he went. But if you're seeing Atlanta's team though, right? I guess it does, in a weird way, it does kind of make sense. If their defense, and they're atrocious, but they figure if they can get enough pressure on the quarterback, there will be a few disruptive plays that their offense can just keep scoring. And if Julio stays healthy, in theory, they can.
Yeah. And, if Deion Jones stays healthy, he should make a huge improvement to this defense. So I think they may still be one of those teams that you can kind of target. We'll see how it goes throughout the season. They may be one of those teams that surprises us, but we'll just have to wait and see. Another team in the AFC South is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who had another awful defense. But this year, even last year they had plenty of good players.
They've got some studs in that team. That's why I've never understood how they are that bad continuously.
Right.
I mean, they got and it seems like they've got someone pretty good at each level, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at who they drafted last year, Vita Vea.
Yeah.
He only played in a couple, or he probably played in 8-9 games. He was definitely underwhelming because he missed a lot of the beginning of the season with a calf injury, I think it was. And now this year he's dealing with a knee injury. So coming into the season, they thought they were going to have a defensive line that consisted of Vita Vea at nose guard, with Ndamukong Suh at one end and Jason Pierre-Paul at the other end. And yeah, he's getting older, but I feel like defensive ends are one of those positions where the older you get, maybe you lose a step, but you can learn how to make up with it with
that's why
your hand movements or whatever.
Guys that like Robert or Dwight Freeney and Robert Quinn, right?
Robert Mathis.
Yeah. And they got older.
And they were still just as good.
It's hard to say they got better, but they maintained as they switched. They were brilliant.
Yeah.
What happened to Gerald McCoy?
Gerald McCoy left to go to Carolina, I'm pretty sure.
So that's a big. He's a stud.
Yeah.
So Vita Vea is going to have to really
He's going to have to step up, but he's dealing with this knee injury now. They're saying he might miss the first 4 to 6 weeks, and Jason Pierre-Paul is also dealing with an injury. I think he had he was in a car accident or something.
Yeah, something weird always.
Something weird. So
and Ndamukong Suh is still a beast.
They look like they're just kind of falling apart again, and they still have an awesome set of linebackers with Levante David and now Devin White. But last year they had Levante David and they had that other awesome linebacker. Damn, I can't remember his name. I think he left to go to the 49ers this year. But, like you were saying, they've always had good players. It's just for whatever reason, it seems like whether it's injuries or whatever happens, they kind of just they fall off the map.
Bad coaching?
Yeah, bad coaching, I guess so. But now they have Bruce Arians there, who's never been a defensive guy, but they bring on my boy Todd Bowles to come from the Jets, who definitely belongs way more as a defensive coordinator than he does as a head coach. So for right now, I'm saying the Buccaneers may be, again, a defense that you can target going into the season, knowing, at least in the beginning of the season, the first couple weeks, that they're a team that you can kind of stream your players against and target them,
A Darius Taylor. That's the other linebacker from Tampa that ended up in the top 100.
It wasn't him. I'm telling you, it was a different dude. And he went to the 49ers. I'm going to have to look it up and get back to you guys on this. But
you ever notice with the linebackers and stuff, though, it really does they come out of the woodwork.
Yep. 2 years ago, Blake Martinez with the with the Packers.
Yes.
Dude just came out of nowhere, and he's like a 100-tackle guy.
And that's how it happens. All of a sudden, you see there's this all-pro, and you're like, who in the... And they're like, oh, he's been playing for 5 years. He's been the linchpin of the defense. Since when?
Yeah, right. The last team I want to talk about, the Raiders last year were a pretty awful defense, and they definitely needed to make some additions on defense, and they did. So starting with their fourth overall pick in this year's draft, I'm sorry, they took the defensive end from Clemson, Flennon Farrell, I think his name is, hopefully to try and rebuild the pass rush that they lost after trading Khalil Mack. They also ended up drafting Max Crosby to help out with that D-line. They improved the secondary by signing Marcus Joyner. They drafted a safety by the name of Jonathan Abram and another corner in Trayvon Mullen. They added to the linebacking group by bringing on notorious dirty-ass player Vontaze Burfict, who I think should have been kicked out of the league. He should have been kicked out of the league years ago.
I always hope to see one of those guards or left tackles break free and just clean clock him.
Yeah. And then they bring in Brandon Marshall from the Broncos.
He's a good player.
So they brought on some serious players, and we'll see if they can mesh together and if they can improve on this defense that was pretty bad last year.
But let me ask you this as we leave this subject, and just your opinion. no matter what John Gruden does to that defense, right, he will always, and please let me know what you think, lose a notch for trading Khalil Mack. I mean, you're not going to find another Khalil Mack.
It depends on if they can find his replacement. If this dude can end up being just as good, then you can't knock him at all.
No, you can't, but that would be incredibly lucky to then get another I mean, from the point of when it happened.
And then they also get another first rounder next year?
You know what, though? The whole point is still, though, you got to try and hit those first rounders, right? And you're just hoping to get a Khalil Mack. That's the upper echelon. But you know what? Johnny wanted to make that his team, and boy, did he.
Yeah, he wants to rebuild the team, and he thought that with the draft capital he could get for Khalil Mack, that he could find a replacement, or if he can replace that pass rush with, maybe 3 or 4 players as opposed to relying on it all from one guy. If he can do it, he can do it. All the power to him. I'm excited to see what Gruden does, especially with AB. I think they're going to do some pretty cool stuff on offense.
I will say that, and I'll put this statement out there on that point. Like, when they got rid of Amari Cooper last year, we all thought he was an idiot. And then they got Antonio Brown.
Right.
So, I still stand by Amari Cooper is not Khalil Mack of his position, but, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
I just think he's such a stud, like a once-in-a-generation stud.
Right. All right, so what do you got for your daily fantasy strategy here? I know you're way more into FanDuel than you are DraftKings, right?
Yeah, yep. So they have different formats. I don't know if DraftKings maybe restructured it, but they used to go with a 2-quarterback situation. Wasn't a fan. I like my daily fantasy to resemble my actual fantasy.
Okay.
So today, as we get near to the season, we're not going to talk specific lineups. We're going to do that next week.
Right.
Today we're going to talk strategy going into, and this is important, the first 4 weeks of the season. We will have an episode where I tell you the strategy after that fact. But this is for the first 4 weeks, and the reason is because...
So this is the strategy you're only using just to start the season off?
Just to start the season off, because every single year for 10 years or so, the first 4 weeks are an offensive mess. And chalk it up to whatever. It takes longer for the offenses to click, whatever. Defenses seem to click quicker, and they always seem to be much more superior to the offense. It doesn't matter who it is. There's very low-level consistency as these guys try to figure it out. And then around week 3, 4, 5 especially, it levels back out. So, again, first 4 weeks. Everything I say, first 4 weeks. There's a good chance 4 weeks in we're having the same conversation because of the way the NFL ebbs and flows, right? Like, depending on how these guys shake out, it could be something similar. But, nonetheless, let's win some money. So, this year for Daily Fantasy, going into this first 4 weeks, the first position, well, before I even say that, the goal of these strategies and of playing Daily Fantasy, what you want is 5 times value. When I say that, I mean every player you take, the price you pay for them times 5. That's the amount of points that you want. So if you're going to pay top dollar for a Pat Mahomes at 9,500, I mean, you can do the math, right? You need a big game from him no matter what.
You need a 45-plus
right,
point game.
Every time to make up for that price. So, again, with that in mind, the strategy behind the first 4 weeks, I will not be purchasing myself a Patrick Mahomes as my quarterback. In fact, the quarterback scenario, I think, as the league unfolds, I think you're much better off in the beginning to go with we'll call them the mid-tier individuals. And by mid-tier, you're talking mid-price, right? Now, I'm going to base it on the FanDuel pricing system where Pat Mahomes is the most expensive player across the board for week 1 at like $9,700, $9,500. For quite a bit less money, you've got your mid-tier guys in the Carson Wentz's, Jared Goff's, Jameis Winston, Kirk Cousins, Phil Rivers, even Lamar Jackson. And these are guys that have offense. I mean, they got weapons. Carson and Goff and Kirk. I mean, you could probably have a hard time picking 3 better offensive weapon teams than the Vikings. I know the Vikings were subpar last year, but the weapons are there. So yeah, to start off, I'm going with a mid-tier quarterback. Now, it's important to know as I go through this too. My strategy when I draft my team is I don't just go down the line. I don't go quarterback, running back, running. It's not just bing, bang, 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 boom. I very specifically pick my positions in an order. So the first thing I do, though, every time is my quarterback. I want to go find my value quarterback. Where can I save money while still having a good chance to hit that, that value? So Carson Wentz having to hit, 30 points sounds a lot more manageable than Pat Mahomes having to hit 45. And even if they both hit, Carson's much cheaper, so my money was able to be spent on other positions.
Right.
So after I find my quarterback, the very next thing I do is jump to the bottom. Now, I do that because the defenses are always cheaper. It's the cheapest position on the board, right? So go pick your defense, get that down, because you'll have your player average price for the positions left inherently go up. So I go get my defense next. Now, for defenses to start the year, as we were talking, as it unfolds, that's where I'm starting against the Colts, because Jacoby Brissett might not have had enough time. This is the only single one I'll single out specifically.
Or maybe the Dolphins.
Or right. Like the Eagles play Washington. So I'm going with the defense that might not necessarily be ranked. I don't want the top-ranked defense because they're generally 5,000. And you know what? At the beginning of the season, there is no rhyme or reason other than maybe the matchup. So there are some really good middle-tier defenses that you can go get, like we just mentioned. And with the offensive shakeups, you have a good chance at winning that matchup. So you can still save some good money on defense while getting a premier output from, again, an Eagles or whoever's playing against the Colts. And, while the Colts might still be a good team overall, there's a good chance that a backup quarterback turns the ball over. That's what's important in fantasy. So I get my defense. I immediately then go target my tight end. So I still have my running backs and my wide receivers.
You do your running backs and your wide receivers last.
And the flex last, right? So I go get my tight end. Now, my tight end, I have two schools of thought, and this will probably maintain most of the year. You either go up or you go low. So you either go get yourself a Travis Kelce, which he's the price of some really good receivers. Look at a George Kittle or Zach Ertz, or what I prefer, especially, again, beginning of the year, no injuries on this, go for, a Tyler Eifert, who before he gets hurt for the season might have an 8-target game. Find a tight end that's on a team where the receivers are hurt. Save some money, and you might have a good volume of targets.
Right.
You don't need a Zach Ertz output if the guy that you got is half the price, still caught a touchdown, and 3 passes. You just need the output. It's the value of
How
price.
much does Jason Witten cost week 1?
I looked. He is dirt cheap. The worst part about Jason Witten is he's one of those random guys that could end up with 10 targets.
Right.
But that's to my point, right? So by doing it this way, now let's just say you went low on the tight end. Again, as the season progresses, I start to maintain a higher tight end because of the consistency in points that you get at the top versus the bottom. There's just no true consistency. And you got Kyle Rudolph cheap. Week 1, he could catch a touchdown. That's all you need.
Where does Austin Hooper usually end up?
Austin Hooper's a great one. He is right under Ndoku, who's like under Ebron. Like those are the guys right there where maybe week 1 I'm looking at. But then if I'm looking at one of those guys, I might go fill my other positions in first to see.
Just to see if you can afford to.
Just to see how it plays out.
Instead of getting one of the low tier tight ends, get
Right.
one of those like bottom middle tier guys.
Right. You can base tight end on a few things, right? I mean, you don't necessarily need a playmaker. You just need a guy that's going to get the targets. If it's a PPR, well, all DFS is PPR.
Right.
So a tight end that comes out and gets 5 catches and a touchdown had a great game.
And isn't it 0.75 PPR? It's not half point, but it's not full point. It's like
It used to be full point. At one point,
okay.
it was half point. They keep changing. I think it's full point now.
Okay.
If it's 0.75, it's news to me, which it could be. I mean, it very well could be. But, the point of the tight end is if you're not going for the stud, because if you go for the stud, you have to remember you're then trying to – you have to offset it somewhere else.
Right.
So you go for one of those middle-tier guys, good volume. You get yourself 10 points from them. Because then at this point, you've now left yourself with enough money to correctly go through your running backs and wide receivers. Now, to start the year, again,
save money at quarterback, save money at tight end, save money at DST, and then spend up at running back and wide receiver.
Again, here's the curveball. You go middle to high on running. I'm not going for Saquon. McCaffrey's he's good. He's pricey. I'm looking at your Leonard Fournettes, your Dalvin Cooks, guys that in the beginning at least are priced a little bit lower than maybe they'll be week 5 or 6.
Uh-huh.
But you're still getting the RB1. So initially I'm looking at guys that are running back ones that maybe just haven't gotten any love yet from the rest of the world. Chris Carson is dirt cheap. And I think he's got a pretty good matchup. You got guys like Devontae Freeman because he was injured last year. He's cheap. So instead of trying to hope Saquon can go get me 50 points, I'd look at Devontae and hope he gets me 20. Because then, and this is where you really hammer it home, after you go get your mid to high RBs, again, these are guys that are going to be RB1s by the end of the year. It's just the fact that they might have been hurt. Whatever the reason is, they're just not up there yet.
There's more hype for some other guys.
Right, and that's fine, because Leonard Fournette week 1 is the starter. Dalvin Cook is the starter.
Right.
And so that situation repeats itself at running back. And you also have your Austin Ecklers. You have guys that are still cheap, that are going to get volume. Because in the beginning of the year, and this is where I'll wrap up my DFS, right? For the first 4 weeks especially, I think where you spend up is the wide receiver. And that all goes back to the absolute offensive mess that is the first 4 weeks of the NFL. The stud receiver still gets his targets.
Right.
Still does his work. Is the most consistent player, arguably, at this point. Somehow the number one receiver, they've become the model of consistency. You can't say that about the running backs. You really can't say that about the quarterbacks. Tight end, you can say about the top 3. So, yeah, I'm going in. And the just so everyone knows, too, the receivers are valued less this year to start than the running backs. So your Julio Jones, I believe it was, is at 8,500, comparatively speaking to the 9,000-something Saquon is, 9,500 for Mahomes, and Julio's the number 1 priced wide receiver. So give me a combination of those top dogs there, middle-tiered everywhere else, and I think you'd be set with a strategy like that.
Right.
So, and next week we'll hone it in more specifically. Again, these guys I'm just using as example players to give you an idea of where I'm discussing. Nothing I've said today reflects my current lineups. We'll get at, different players. We'll get into that next week. It's just strategy I use to make the lineup.
Cool. Yeah, we're going to, hopefully every week we're going to do a little segment. Adam's going to run through a lineup or two, guys that he likes their value or guys that he thinks have good matchups. And, we'll hopefully help you guys win some money, and we'll see throughout the year how much we'll start like a separate account for you, and we'll keep track of your the lineups that you set for the podcast, and we'll see how they do throughout the season. It'll be a fun little thing that we do. So that's going to do it for episode 3 of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for joining us. The next time we hear you guys, or you hear from us, will be the season 1 preview. Part 1, it's going to be Tuesday, or we'll be recording it Tuesday, August, I guess.
September 3rd.
Oh, geez, yes, September 3rd, sorry. And so we'll get you guys ready for the Thursday night game. We'll look at some injuries, and then part 2, which we'll record on that Thursday night that the Bears play the Packers. And we'll get you ready for all the other games throughout the rest of the week. So we will catch you guys next week, and as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.